All right, international relations friends, we're going to continue out here, finish up chapter 9. We're going to begin with slide number 30 and the final feature number 7, called A Great Power War. And basically, this thesis is kind of similar to the Clash of Civilizations thesis, in that it thinks there's going to be war, but it differs because it does not think it's because of civilizational clashes or religious clashes or some form of worldview clash, but rather the fact that states are going to basically assume their sovereignty, and they're going to basically push for their own interests. And so it's very much a realist vision here, that basically national interest and great power interest is going to basically overcome everything else, and that's what's going to cause these clashes. That it holds that authoritarian regimes will push back against the encroachment of democracy, all this democratization that's going on in the world. The warlord, the general, think of your nation that's led by some form of a general. Something like that will arise. Again, democracy is very, very fragile, and many times it's most fragile when it initially is implemented. Okay, and because again, one of the great challenges of implementing democracy in any nation is you've got to have a culture and ethos of democratic principles. Okay, where the United States has enjoyed literally hundreds and hundreds of years of liberal principles, hearkening back to the Brits in the from Magna Carta in the 13th century up to the present era. Many countries don't have that kind of a tradition. They don't have common law tradition. They don't have a lot of the freedoms and things that we've enjoyed. And so suddenly you impose it upon a country, or it's initially implemented, it's very, very fragile. So what tends to happen is you get one person, one vote, one time, and then some sort of a dictator arises, or some sort of authoritarian figure arises. And so in this thesis, that would lead to some form of great power war, okay? And because there's multiple polarity going on in the world, okay? You've got the United States, you've got Russia, you've got all of this changing alignments going on right now. Again, where Russia has granted Putin, he's almost becoming dictator for life, and he's implementing a lot of the old Soviet methodology. That could lead to some form of war again, because the Ukraine is connected to NATO. If Russia would suddenly attack the Ukraine, is that going to trigger the United States and other Western European nations to basically go to war against Russia? We don't know, but that's a trigger point. Another issue, if you go to slide number 31, is perhaps a greater likelihood is the United States and China going to war against one another because of trade imbalances, or because of encroaching on one another's turf. That could be a problem. Per John Mearsheimer, in the same way that the United States has dominated the Western Hemisphere, he argues that China is going to dominate Asia in the same way. And so because of that, the United States is going to feel threatened, and that could perhaps create some sort of a tension there. If you go to slide number 32, the vision of the great power war. It differs in other responses from realists in that it embraces offensive realism. Is that basically nations are going to maintain their security by preventing other states from gaining regional superiority. Again, take the example of China. China is flexing its muscles in the China Sea. It's flexing its muscles with Japan. It's flexing its muscles with other nations in that area. Is that going to trigger the United States to get involved? Because again, America has a lot of has good relations with the Japanese and things of that nature. And the idea of defensive realism is this idea that in this balance of power, there's going to be, in other words, right now, American hegemony, American control of various sectors of the world if that is challenged, okay, the idea of defensive realism is America's going to do whatever it can to maintain the status quo, to maintain the current balance of power that tends to favor the Americans, okay? No, and you could take that with China. You could take that with Russia. You could take that with any other country, basically, feeling threatened in such a way that it's going to basically push back. The critique of the great power war, it fails to consider internal politics in various countries. It dismisses the liberal commercialist argument regarding the pacifying impact of economic interdependence. In other words, liberals would say, listen, we understand your concern of a great power war, but we are so economically interconnected that the likelihood of this happening is just so remote that we would not even consider it on our radar screen. The other critique of this is it ignores nuclear weapons and the fact that the United States and China and Russia and other countries that have nuclear warfare or nuclear capability basically are restrained. Remember we talked about the stability-instability paradox and the idea of mutually assured destruction is because that's in place. The critique pushes back and says the likelihood of a great power war is very remote because no nation is going to try to unwittingly destroy the world that way. And so it's just kind of interesting how that all works. But as I conclude this lecture, if you're going on to your discussion posts, you've got to come up with which paradigm, which vision of the future of these 7 do you think is going to be the best? The end of history, one world, a world state, war becomes unthinkable, an engendered peace, clash of civilizations, great power war. It'll be interesting reading your posts as you kind of try to verbalize, so to speak, your viewpoints on that. It'll be really interesting to hear what you think. So that closes out the lecture on this, and I'll connect with you again with another video coming soon about the global pandemic project. I've been wrestling with whether or not to have you guys do this, but you know what? It's a great way to save the world. We're all in the middle of this right now, and so I think this will be very, very very, very interesting for me to read as far as how you propose some solutions to solve a global pandemic. We're not going to be able to do this in groups. Again, I'm operating under the assumption, I could be wrong, if we don't meet together the rest of this school year, I think it's better just to have you work on these individually. So anyway, I'll have an announcement where I talk about this formally, probably my next video announcement. So stay tuned with that. All right. Take care and have a great rest of your day.